Tissues, again, kind of histology in a 10-minute nutshell. How many of you guys loved histology? Do you guys love histology? Why does nobody ever love histology? There's a lot of people shaking their heads. Oh my gosh. I don't like histology either. But it is the building block for everything, right? Cells and tissues make organs, and learning about those organs, that's the fun stuff. Okay. So after today, after we break through all these building blocks that are very important, then we're going to get to some quasi-fun stuff next week, where we start talking about, what do we start talking about next week? Got cell structure, enzymes, and metabolisms. Okay, well, it's a slow build up to the fun stuff. Okay, but next week we're going to start looking at all cells and the activity inside of a cell and enzymes and why they're important and how we make energy to do all this stuff inside of our body that we're going to be talking about. Excuse me. Every time we go up a level of complexity, we get more and more functionality. Okay, the cell is the basic structural functional unit of living things, of all of our systems. A group of cells working together for a common goal get you tissue. A group of tissues working for a common goal get you an organ. A bunch of organs working for a common goal get you a system. All those systems interacting get you everything that you see in the mirror every single day. Get you the organism. Okay. This book does a very interesting job at kind of introducing topics and whatnot, and we'll look at some cells when we talk about all the various different systems, and we'll look at how those cells come together and give us tissues, and we're going to see how those tissues function, and ultimately that's going to be what those organs are going to be doing, and then we look at how they all interact with one another. Okay? So remembering your basic levels of organization is, something that I hope that you did not forget. We have 4 major types of tissues here. You can probably figure out what muscle tissue does. Obviously, that's the big one. Movement. Nervous tissue, sorry. Nervous tissue is involved with communicating. Okay. There's some protection here. Protect, cover. Okay. And connective tissue is ultimately going to help you bind stuff together, right? Most complex of all of these are probably connective tissue, right? Or most varied, I guess I should say. Is connective tissue. You have connective tissue that's solid and bone, liquid and blood, everything in between. Which one of these 3 right here, guys, is voluntary?
Skeletal.
Skeletal. Which one is striated?
Cardiac.
Cardiac. What else? Anything else?
And skeletal.
And skeletal.
It's been a while.
That's okay. And then smooth is fusiform shaped, right? Does it still have actin and myosin like skeletal and cardiac? Flip of a coin.
I believe not.
You believe not? So. How much you want to bet? You want to bet any money?
Ooh, maybe next time.
All 3 of them have the same thing, right? They have actin, they have myosin, they have some other stuff as well. But those are the 2 biggies that we're going to spend the most of our time talking about. And they have them. It's just that skeletal and cardiac, it's in a repeated fashion. Those sarcomeres, right? They're in light, dark, light, dark, light, dark. That's actin and myosin in alternating bands. Smooth muscle doesn't have that alternating band setup. Still has actin and myosin, and they're still interacting, but Smooth muscle, when it contracts, is a heck of a lot different from skeletal muscle, right? Skeletal muscle contracts and boom, muscle shortens. Cardiac muscle contracts, shortens. You push the blood. Smooth muscle is weird, okay? Smooth muscle can constrict, can peristalt, okay? It can expand and then contract really weird. So it doesn't need that traditional sarcomere kind of lineup of light and dark alternating, but they're still there. But they contract just a smidge different to allow them to expand. I don't need my skeletal muscle to expand. I want it to get swole, right? You want it to get swole. I'm just being stupid. Skeletal muscle, obviously, guys, voluntary. You control it. Are there times when you can't control it?
Yeah, spasms.
Muscle spasms, reflexes, obviously, as well. So there are times that, that you can't. Tongue is also skeletal muscle. You don't really think about your tongue moving. I'm talking and it's moving and I can feel it moving in my mouth. But it just moves on its own. So there are some cases where it's just moving, okay, where you're not telling it to move. Tongue move. Could you imagine if you sit there and tell your tongue to do all those little intrinsic movements just to make sounds? Good
That would
Lord.
be awful.
That would be awful. It'd be like somebody, it'd be like those people on TV having that little thing in their ear. Somebody's talking to you the whole dang time. Crazy. Esophagus. Esophagus is kind of part skeletal muscle and part smooth muscle. But you don't sit there as soon as you swallow that food, you don't sit there and think, okay, I should swallow. Okay, fine. It's in the smooth muscle part. I don't have to think. There are cases. Okay. We have striations, which means just alternating light and dark bands. And we'll see that, I believe, on the next slide. And for the most part, they're called skeletal muscle because these things attach to bone. Obviously, there are a few things, sphincter muscles and whatnot that aren't really attached to bone, but there's still some skeletal muscles. But for the most part, 98% of the time, these things attach to bone. They produce a graded response, which means it is a smooth, under normal situations, it is a smooth, coordinated type of a function. Okay. Because I can be really soft and gentle, or I can smack myself really damn good. Okay. And that's a graded response depending upon the input that goes into the muscle from the brain. We'll talk about that later. There's with skeletal muscle. I know, you're probably having twitches right now of histology lab, but it's okay. Breathe. We don't have to identify this anymore. You can be free and move on. But that's what skeletal muscle looks like. Alternating light and dark bands. You see that zebra-like appearance there. Okay, and that's actin and myosin. Myosin being the thick stuff, the dark, actin being the lighter stuff. As you can kind of see, you can see those same striations here, at least I can. If you can't, after a few years of looking at these things, you'll see it. But you can see those alternating light and dark bands right there. Actin and myosin in a repeating fashion. We also have a couple of variations here. You can see these dark lines right here. These are intercalated disc. These are specialized kind of desmosomes / gap junctions. They form a tight seal in between the highly branched cardiac muscle cells, and they allow ions to quickly move from one cell to the next, which is a functionality of this thing. It allows it to function as a unit, a syncytial. Only in the heart, branched, interconnected both physically and electrically, and that's by that intercalated disc. Intercalated. I am sorry, I just can't write today. Intercalated disc. Okay. Again, it's just a tight junction with a gap junction within it. Okay. holds them together physically with the tight junction, electrically with the gap, allowing those ions to quickly move through it, which allows this thing to kind of function as a unit. Okay. The heart contracts and it's always the same. Okay. It's not like skeletal muscle where it can produce a graded contraction where it can be really light or really intense. Okay. It's either always light or always intense, or hopefully not, because that would be bad. But hopefully it's just always a normal muscle contraction. Okay. So there are no graded potentials here. It is involuntary. Duh. You don't tell your heart to contract. Okay. And the heart has some fun things about it here, and obviously we'll dive into that later. Smooth muscle is muscle of organs, viscera. So any organ that you can think of pretty much has smooth muscle within it. Okay. It is not striated, it is involuntary. Okay. And this one's going to be found in layers. Cardiac muscle, skeletal muscle is not necessary. There's not layers of it. Okay, there's just a number of cells on top of a number of cells, but no distinct layers. In smooth muscle, we have a longitudinal layer of muscle. We have a circular ring of muscle. Okay, so you're going to have muscles that are longitudinal in nature and circular in nature. Okay, these help to constrict. These help this thing to, they relax and allow the tube to expand, okay? And then they contract and they help to propel things forward through the tube. And that's what peristalsis is, wave-like contraction. It's that setup that is very weird. It's that setup that allows a great deal of stretching, plasticity, and it's the reason why we have a vast amount of contraction to both constrict and propel things forward through the tube. They're fusiform shaped. Fusiform means spindle. Spindle shaped cells. Shaped. And you can see kind of, there's that spindle-shaped appearance, okay? You see the nucleus kind of has that spindle-shaped appearance, and the cell does the same thing, okay? Kind of follow this. There it is, and then I lose it. There it is, and you can see, booyah, comes to a conical end there. Fusiform-shaped, spindle-shaped. Neurons, when you think of nervous tissue, this is what we think of, all right? We all know there's nerves, there's glial cells. They all have a very distinct look, but for all intents and purposes right now, this is what nervous tissue looks like. This you probably know and remember. We can see we have a number of extensions, and if you've taken anatomy recently, then you know this is a multipolar type of a neuron right here. There are a couple other different types. This is the most common one. It has a bunch of shorter extensions going to the nerve cell body. These are called dendrites, okay? They take the info. I'll just put an arrow in that direction right there, that direction, okay? You can have many dendrites. You can have one dendrite. But again, this is the most common shape of it right here. We have a centralized nerve cell body. Sometimes you'll hear me say soma. It's another word for it. Okay. Nerve cell body or soma. Okay. Soma means body. And then generally only one fiber taking impulses away. And that's always going to be the axon. So when you think of a nervous tissue, here you go. Okay. And that cell body has all the fabulous stuff that any cell has. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Where do we find nervous tissue? Obviously, the nervous system, brain, spinal cord, nerves. And nervous tissues do one major thing: conduct impulses. The neuroglial cells, they do not. They just support. They help protect, maintain the environment of, allow the conduction to occur faster. That's their general functions. Okay? And again, we'll hint at those a little bit later just to stir the pot, refresh your memoir. Epithelial covers things. Helps form barriers, a little bit of protection. Okay. Epithelial is great because it helps to define a structure. Okay. Helps to define a structure. We classify them by a couple different ways. One way is by the number of layers. And when we do that, we have the moniker simple or stratified. Simple is simple, one layer. Stratified, many layers. Easy. Okay. When you're looking at a tissue, remember epithelium is always the outermost part. Okay. Epithelium is the outermost part. Aside from the number of layers of cells these things can have, they can vary by shape. We have flat-shaped cells, squamous, right? Flat. Nucleus right smack dab in the center. We have ones that look like a square, as tall as they are long. Okay. Cuboidal. Booyah. Nucleus right in the center. And we have columnar-shaped cells. Shaped like, shockingly, a column, with nucleus in the bottom third of that cell. If you know where the nucleus is when you're looking at histology, you can figure anything out, okay? Because all the nuclei line up because they're all in the same spot. The only cell that differs with that is fat, adipose, because they're all squished in random locations against the plasma membrane. Transitional epithelium. It can have a few different looks. And what's the other one? Pseudostratified columnar epithelium. Those obviously can have some slightly varied looks. But the vast majority of them, if you see the nucleus and you see them all lined up, it tells you everything you need to know. They have some modifications on them, guys. And, you know, sometimes the modifications are just individual cells that you find in between them. Sometimes they have small hairs called microvilli. Microvilli are there for one reason. What is that one reason?
Rid of debris and like stuff that shouldn't be there.
Help move debris. What else?
Can't they sense things too? Or am I thinking of something else?
Yeah, you're thinking of some of the small little hairs within the ear. So in that case, yes, you're right. We have some small hairs within the special senses that are microvilli-ish in nature that can be used to detect things. But if we're not talking about special senses, microvilli, atop from helping to kind of twitch things and move them across the surface, that would be a second function. Their primary function is just to increase surface area. I'm just going to put SA for surface area. Okay. Increase surface area, I can increase absorption. I can increase secretion. And in cells where you see that microvilli, that's one of that tissue's functions. You know, we'll see that in digestive tract. We'll see that in the kidneys as well. Okay. Sometimes we have a modification that's just an individual cell. And in that case, you'll see an individual cell, and I'll just draw because I'm such a freaking good drawer. Gosh, man, look at that. That's freaking awesome. Sometimes we just have a cell right here, and that's your goblet cell. That is really pretty good. Goblet cell. Goblet cells produce mucus, and that keeps the tube lubricated. And lubrication is always a fantastic thing, especially in the digestive tract. Flashbacks. Here's examples of these, the question I know I'm going to get from you guys, are you going to ask questions about an example of a location or what its structure or function is? And the question is, I'll probably ask maybe one or two. Okay. I'm not going to do a deep dive. I mean, this is the basic building blocks for the functionality of all the crap that we're going to be talking about from here on out. So if you don't know that simple squamous is one layer thick and allows quick diffusion, it's just more stuff you're going to have to go back and memorize again. If you don't know that simple cuboidal or cube-shaped one layer, and they're always found around ducts and tubes that are involved with secreting, that's just stuff that you should have remembered from the previous class, from anatomy. Okay. Columnar, usually very evident throughout the entire digestive tract. Transitional epithelium in the blood. I mean, there's certain things that we're going to be talking about, and if you can't remember these basic building blocks of understanding some functions and diving into the deep end with some of these functions, it's just more you're going to have to remember. So will I ask a handful of questions? Yeah, I may ask 2 or 3 questions off of this slide. Okay. I'm not going to do a whole deep dive histo exam on the first exam. Okay. And they're just trying to show you pictures. Again, just trying to get you to remember and relate these things back to what their function is. Okay. Because obviously this class is all of a class of function. Okay. I mean, yeah, many layers. Bottom layer can look cubish in nature, and then as you get closer to the apical surface, closer to the free edge, they'll look cubish or columnar shaped. So, yeah, or flat, stratified squamous epithelium. You can have stratified tissue be keratinized or non-keratinized, and for that, stratified squamous. Keratinized is found where? What's an example? Everyone knows an example. You're touching it right now.
Fingernail.
Yes. Skin. Okay. You have non-keratinized tissue. It's mouth. Anything with an opening to the outside world. Stick a finger in your nose, stick a finger in your butt. There you go. Non-keratinized tissue. Can secrete stuff. Can absorb stuff. Okay. Keratinized is that waterproofing agent. Oh, gosh, that's a fantastic picture, isn't it? You'd love that histology test. The book goes into a number of how these things are created. And the how these glands are made, just know this, guys. They are derived from epithelium, okay? So they're derived from that skin tissue, epithelial tissue. We have 2 types of glands that we're going to ultimately talk about a little bit here and there. We have exocrine and we have endocrine. Exocrine are, these are the ones that are going to be secreting by a duct. Okay. And that's probably the big difference between exocrine and endocrine. And that goes to how they're made. And here's a little picture that kind of looks into it. it's just an invagination of the epithelial tissue. Okay. If it's going to be an exocrine gland, there's duct right there, and there's different types of ducts. And honestly, we're not going to get into it. If it's destined to become an endocrine gland, it still invaginates in, but then these supporting cells that came down and invaginated in, they go away, and there's your capillary, and there's your endocrine tissue. And it packages up, secretes it out, gets into the blood, and the blood transports it around. I mean, so that's really the big difference. Endocrine is ductless. Exocrine is via a duct. Ecrine and apocrine, I don't really know how much I'll probably ask of it. Maybe a question, if any, guys. There are just different types of exocrine glands. Ones that package their secretion into vesicles like ecrine. Apocrine, you can secrete it and lose the apical surface. You can have sweat glands that are sebaceous glands that are involved with the whole cell, going the way of the dodo and exploding and secreting sebum onto a hair follicle and there onto the surface of the skin. So there are a number of different types of exocrine glands. They give a couple different ones here. Don't do heavy lifting. Don't spend 35 minutes trying to memorize those two things. We'll finish this last one and we'll take a little break. Last thing is connective tissue. We're going to fly through this one, guys. The most varied, just because of, like I said earlier, it's everything from solid bone to liquid blood and everything in between. Okay. Sorry. When we think of connective tissue, we think of connective tissue proper. Okay. You don't necessarily think of blood, bone. We'll talk about them, obviously. But when we think of connective tissue, we have either a lot of matrix and few cells or few fibers, or we have little matrix and a lot of fibers. And that's the difference between when we think of connective tissue, loose and dense. What's another name for loose connective tissue? Does anybody remember? Starts with an A.
Adipose? No.
Nope.
Sorry.
That's a type. Areolar. Areolar is also loose connective tissue. Another name for it. Areolar or loose connective tissue, it's just packing. Okay. It fills the voids. The body doesn't like voids. Okay. Either fills it with the F word, fat, or loose connective tissue. Okay. You'll find a lot of that packing in there. All right. Number of different types of loose connective tissue. Adipose, again, is one of those that someone chimed in. Would be an example of it. But when we think of it, we have loose, we have few fibers there and a lot of matrix, a lot of space. With dense regular connective tissue, you can have also dense irregular. I get it. But with dense regular connective tissue, this is like your tendons, okay, your ligaments. This is what you think of when you think of a dense regular connective tissue. Buttload of fibers in very little space for anything else, very little matrix, okay? And that's all we're trying to say here, all right? That's what we're trying to say here. There's fat. There's the F word, okay? All these are adipocytes where you store excess stuff, okay? You can see the Nucleus is squished up against the wall there, squished up against the plasma membrane. Dense irregular tissue, I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, fibers going in every direction. Obviously, that's not drawn to scale. What's the difference between this and what's the purpose of fibers going in every different direction for dense irregular as compared to dense regular, which the fibers are all going in one direction? What's the difference between those two things? Or why is there a need for that?
Resistance to forces
Yeah, right?
and like impact.
Collagen fibers, what do? They resist forces in the direction of the fibers. Tendons and ligaments are fantastic. They hold you together. But if you have a force that comes in that direction, and there are no fibers going in that direction, that is not going to help you. And that's when you go to the orthopedist. Dense irregular connective tissue, right? That was in the deeper part of the dermis. Can it help to handle forces in all different directions there? So the directions of those collagen fibers is pretty significant, pretty important. What does this mean? What does site mean?
So
Beautiful. What does chondro mean?
I don't remember. It's cartilage.
There you go. See what happens if you just know what words mean? If you've taken med-term, good Lord, you can sleepwalk through half of biology. Okay. If I had osteocyte there, talking about bone cell. Okay. Enterocyte, intestinal cell. Okay. So just break the word down. Obviously, cartilage is riddled with chondrocytes that produce cartilaginous matrix. And depending upon the type of cartilage you have, gets you a different type of cartilaginous matrix that gets produced. Obviously, these are the model for what bone will become after you get kicked out of mom. There's your bone. And blast means to make. Are osteoblasts mature or immature?
Sure.
So we have 3 types of cells, right? Well, 4. We have osteoblast. I have an osteocyte. I have an osteoclast. And I have a stem cell, an osteoprogenitor cell, but I don't want to put that here because I don't want to spell it. We have osteoblast. It produces a copious amount. I just love saying copious amount of bony matrix. Okay. It's really the more immature version. Once it produces a significant amount, that osteoblast will stop or slow down its production of bony matrix, and it becomes a more mature osteocyte. Need to reabsorb bone and destroy it a little bit? Well, that's where the osteoclast comes in. And the osteocyte doesn't necessarily deviate and become an osteoclast all of a sudden. There's another cell that gets tweaked into becoming that dude. And then he goes in there and chews up the bone. What's bone look like? There it is. I know. Flashbacks, right? But there's the bone. Okay. And you can see there's the Osteocyte in the lacunae, right? Oh, you love these words, right? Okay, let's get to an artist rendition. There's the osteocyte within the lacunae. Lacunae just means little house. Central canal or Herversian canal, but they want you to use central. So use central. These things that look like broken glass, these shatter marks, those are canaliculi, just tiny little canals. It's how osteocytes communicate with one another, get nutrients, get rid of waste. Okay, here's a tooth in cross section. Here you can see that. Pulp cavity, cementum to sealing into the maxilla or the mandible. Dentin, bony material.